Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. I know I am. So, I haven't been making very many videos lately, at least compared to what I was putting out, because I just recently moved and I've been really busy. I am working on the research of a video, which I plan on recording no later than Sunday, and putting that up. Like I said, I'm doing the research, so or that video will be more of kind of like more content, not just me riffing like I am now. I do have a purpose for this though. So I was reading something online, and it was this article that Microsoft or whatever puts up there. I think it's like if you use the Edge browser, I guess that's what it is. They put these little things, and it's completely clickbaity. It's just like why no one cares about Gen X, which is kind of like, damn, really? So for people who don't know, in the United States, Gen X refers to people who were born between 1965 and roughly 1980, 81. Sometimes I've heard it defined as 77, but usually it's about 80 and 81. So I am, by whatever definition, I'm either a really young Gen Xer or a really old millennial. I usually identify as a Gen Xer because there are certain things that they'll say this characterizes Gen X. And one of them is, for example, you grew up with both analog and digital, which is true. The first albums I owned, I think I was like maybe 5 or 6, and they were actually albums. They were actual vinyl albums. It was Run DMC and Keith Sweat. First concert I went to, I want to say it was in 1987 or 88, and I was like really young, but it was New Edition. I think it was right after Bobby Brown had left the group. So there you go. I consider myself a Gen Xer. But why no one cares about Gen X, it basically comes down to Gen Xers are boring. And we're boring because we don't have extremes, right? So, we have these measures of things. We have the vinyl, we have the digital, we aren't obsessed with the internet, da-da-da. But the interesting generations are, of course, the boomers, and kind of lumping in the same category, the millennials and the Gen Z. And they're saying, because they kind of implied, they're more extremes. I think it really comes down to who got messed up the most, right? And maybe when it comes down, Gen Z is a little bit messed up more than millennials, but hear me out. And if I know I'm like throwing shade an entire generation or 3 entire generations, but hear me out. If you were a boomer, right? So what happened if you were a boomer? You're born between 1945 and 1965, okay? And the generation before you, they experienced, I guess you got the silent generation, the forgotten, whatever. They lived through the people who were making the decisions for the boomers. The older ones were people who had experienced World War I. Their parents had experienced either World War I or World War II. And then some of them even were involved in Korea. So you figure they would want peace. And then you would also figure that the parents or the people who were in charge, where the boomers were in charge, would have been happy, because following World War II, at least in the U.S., this was like unprecedented growth for white Americans, not for other people. Black people didn't have it too great, but if you're a white American, it was great. Europe was destroyed, so industry was like really booming in the U.S., unprecedented economic growth. So you figure they would just sit back and just enjoy it. Nope. Instead, what did they do? We're going to start Vietnam. We're going to get into Cuba. We're going to start, and it's the same generation, same experience. So what did the Russians do? Russia and the United States, we're going to have a Cold War because we're bored. And who had to deal with this junk? The boomers. So think about this, an entire generation that was scared to death of nuclear war, right? But then if you're a Gen Xer, you would have been kind of too young to be forced into things. Now, there's a lot of veterans who are Gen Xers, right? Like, I'm a veteran, and I was in Iraq, and there's a lot of Gen Xers who were in a foreign conflict. But we kind of volunteered to do that. We weren't told to do it like the boomers who had to go to Vietnam. So I'm not saying that we don't have screwed up people, but man, think about how screwed up it is if you have no intention of fighting a conflict and then you got to go fight in Vietnam and you don't even want to do that. And who forces you to do that? The other generation who couldn't just sit back and enjoy the prosperity. And what about the millennials? Well, the funny thing about that, and this is just one example, is the first thing I'm going to bring up Columbine. So that happened, I think, it was either I know it happened between the 1998-1999 school year, and that's the start of it. Because since then, in the United States, we have school shootings so much that, and if you don't live in the United States, you may not be aware of this, they actually have active shooter drills. Like they have to train kids, or they feel the need to train kids to prepare themselves for the possibility of someone going up into a school and shooting it up. So then they got to deal with that. But on top of that, they're the first generation to really get into social media. So at least like when you were at school, if you were getting bullied, you would have some, like, I guess, reprieve when you get home to get away from it. But you don't even have that, because now we can get on you digitally. And then on top of that, going to the next generation after the millennials is Gen Z. They don't even communicate very well in person, at least not compared to, well, that's a broad statement, but let's put it this way. The online presence is much stronger than it was when I was a teenager. So a big milestone for us was getting your driver's license. We would hang out at the mall. It'd be face to face. Because talking on the phone usually had only one phone line. So, talking on the phone for hours was the only option you had. And even then, if you didn't have call waiting, which if you don't know what call waiting is, I don't know what to tell you, you piss your parents off. So it seems like the boomers got messed up by the generation before them, whether it was the foreign wars that they were forced to go fight, or the rights that they deny certain people, causing this civil strife. That was traumatizing. And the millennials and the Gen Z got messed up by technology and kind of the inaction of implementing proper policies. And even now, I mean, when we have things which could have been handled better, for example, we had the pandemic. I'm not going to get into that. Should we have had lockdowns? Yeah, I think we should have had lockdowns. But I think we could have implemented things where there was more social, maybe things where people could have socialized more. Now, me personally, I'm okay with spending days alone. I'm good with talking or doing internet and everything. But for a lot of people, they're messed up by that. And think about that. The point in your life where you really need to communicate with people, where you're learning those communication, socialization skills, you have an entire generation of people who are probably going to be on some extent stunted by that. Then we know they're behind academically. I'm in education, so I see that. How is that affecting them? And I think the reason this was because you had inconsistent policies when it came down to the shutdown. And you had people who were fighting against one another on what we should do, instead of acknowledging that, look, here's something we should try to protect ourselves from it. But let's also acknowledge that our young people need to socialize, that they need to feel safe, that they need to find friendships, that they need to learn these skills. And we have an entire generation that isn't experiencing that. So politically, things are a mess now because of social media. There's misinformation, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into that. I made videos about that before. So it seems like millennials, and especially Gen Z, they're being messed up by those things. So in the middle, Gen X is just kind of like, so yeah, no one cares about us because we're kind of boring. But at least the thing we did do is that Gen X kind of, for the most part, we created rap, or at least in its modern form. And a lot of the original, people, founders of hip hop were older boomers. But rap is our art form. Social media invented by Gen X. Yeah. But it just comes down to we're just kind of boring. But guess what? I'm okay with being boring. At least I'm fairly well adjusted.